Perry, feeling hungry, asked Ted to drive across town to a bar to grab some subs, offering to cover the cost. Ted pointed out the distance and suggested ordering delivery instead to save time, but Perry insisted on treating themselves since the boss was paying. Ted reluctantly agreed and left the programming room, nicknamed the Cave. As expected on a Friday evening, traffic was heavy, making the trip to the popular Gino's even longer. Though it was far, Ted knew the food would be worth the wait, as Gino's was known for its excellent sandwiches and pizza. He had to drive through the parking lot twice before finding a spot, and ended up, of course, in the back. On his way to the entrance, he noticed a car that looked just like his wife's, but it couldn't be. She was supposed to be home with her sister, who was visiting on her way home from college. At the bar, Ted approached the cash register and informed the waitress he was there to pick up a phone order. She checked but couldn't find any order under his name. Confused, Ted explained that his coworker, Perry, had placed the order 20 minutes earlier. The waitress couldn't find any record of it, so Ted called Perry to confirm. Perry insisted he had placed the order and told Ted to wait for it to be made since they had some time. Perry explained that their boss, Tony, had just checked in with him, asking how much longer the work would take. Perry had told Tony it would be at least 2 or 3 more hours, so they were in no immediate rush to return. This gave Ted some reassurance that he could afford to wait a little longer for the food without any issues at work. Ted relayed the order to the waitress and sat at the bar to wait. As he scanned the room, he was shocked to see his wife, Kristen, dancing with his boss, Tony, and her sister nearby. The sight left him stunned. What the heck? Ted was about to go over and figure out what was happening when he saw something that shocked him. Kristen was on her tiptoes with her arm around Tony's neck, giving him a passionate kiss. While they were kissing, Tony's hand was on her backside and the other was on her top. Even from a distance, Ted could see Kristen moving against the clear bulge in Tony's pants. As Ted made his way across the room, pushing through the crowd, Tony broke the kiss, turned partially, and wrapped his arm around Kristen's waist. He led her off the dance floor and toward the exit. As they walked, he let his hand slide down to her backside again. Ted quickly snapped a few photos and followed them outside. They crossed the parking lot towards the row where Kristen's car was parked. Every now and then, they would stop to kiss before continuing on. Ted managed to take a few more pictures during these kisses. When they reached Tony's pickup truck, parked near Kristen's car, they stopped and Kristen leaned against it. Tony pressed against her, and they shared another deep kiss. Soon, Tony pulled back slightly and started unbuttoning Kristen's blouse. After several more kisses, Tony opened the back door of his truck and pushed Kristen into the seat. Ted took a moment to unbuckle and unzip his pants before crawling into the truck with Kristen. After closing the door, Ted stood by the vehicle, watching in disbelief as his life fell apart. He took photos with his phone, feeling a grim satisfaction when he heard Kristen ask, "Honey, what's that flashing light?" Tony quickly replied, "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. It's probably just headlights from passing cars. Relax. No one can see us." Ted watched as Kristen did just that, locking her heels around Tony's thighs and moving with him. She reached her climax soon after, letting out her usual loud cry. Tony braced himself on his arms and delivered a few more hard thrusts before grunting loudly and finishing inside her. Furious, Ted wrapped a handkerchief around his head, yanked Tony out of the truck, kicked him hard in the groin, and searched his pockets for his wallet and keys. He left the truck keys in the tailgate, hoping the truck would be stolen, and planned to toss the wallet out the window in a rough area on his way back to the office. Returning to the bar, Ted collected his order from the waitress, claiming he had been chatting with a friend. He then took a winding path to his car to avoid being seen by Kristen and Tony. As he left, he saw Kristen helping Tony into the truck. Fuming, Ted drove back to the office, nearly causing 2 accidents. Once there, he carried the food inside, locked the door behind him, and stormed into the server room. Perry greeted him with a smile, asking if he had stopped by home or something. Ted tossed the food bag onto Perry's desk and nearly collapsed into the chair next to it. Perry turned around and shouted, "What the heck?" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Ted's expression, then asked, "Oh man, you okay?" "Not really." Kristen was there. She was cheating with Tony in his truck's backseat. "Crap. I'm really sorry to hear that." "Yeah, well, it's not your fault. Actually, it kind of is." Ted glared at Perry, his anger showing clearly. "What are you talking about, jerk?" "As the system administrator, I was checking emails for business use when I found a bunch of messages between Tony and Kristen. They planned to meet tonight. Tony said he'd keep you busy so they could have some private time. I didn't want to mention it in case it wasn't what it seemed, so I sent you for the sandwiches to see if anything was up. That's why I didn't place the order. I wanted you to be there longer just in case." Well, things were definitely not right. I've got some explicit photos of them in the act in his truck. "Man, I'm sorry. What are you going to do next?" "You really have to ask?" "I'm done with her and quitting this crappy job." As expected, neither of them got much work done that night. They spent a lot of time talking about Ted's next steps. Ted showed Perry the photos and described what he'd done to Tony. Perry laughed and said, "Good. If Tony shows up at work tomorrow, we need to make sure to give him a hard time, especially if he's moving carefully." Ted lingered in his chair for a moment before getting up and starting to gather his stuff. Perry watched him and said, "Hey man, are you heading out? We still have work to do and I need you here to finish up." "Yeah, I'm done. Screw Tony and this lousy job." "Sorry, man." "Hold on, Ted. You can't just leave like this. What's your plan? Are you going to go home and confront Kristen? And what about Tony? You can't let him off the hook. You need to get your act together and plan this properly or you'll end up losing more in the divorce than you need to. Let's wrap this up and make a plan." They don't need any more warnings than what you give them. They finished their work just after 1:30 a.m. and headed out. Standing by the office door, Perry tried calling Tony to lock the doors and set the alarm, but Tony didn't answer. They kept trying to call him, joking about his lack of response. After 20 minutes, Perry called the security chief and asked him to lock up and set the alarm since they couldn't reach Tony. Just before getting into their cars, Perry said, "This is ridiculous. This is the only place I've worked where I don't have a key or alarm code. If something goes wrong after hours, we have to wait for Tony or the security to come fix it." Perry then had a sudden realization and said, "It just hit me. The only time we have to call Tony is when we're working late. I wonder if it's because he's involved with other people's wives, too. I don't know, and honestly, I don't care. He messed with mine, and I'm going to make him and Kristen pay. I'm exhausted. See you tomorrow. Or I guess today." Later, when Ted stumbled into their small rental house, Kristen still wasn't home. He was furious about what he'd seen and wanted to confront her, but he was relieved she wasn't there. He wondered where she could be, but figured she was probably with Tony. Ted took a quick shower and collapsed into bed. He was asleep almost instantly and didn't wake up until the sun blazed in his eyes the next morning at 9:30. Pulling back the covers, he noticed that Kristen's side of the bed was untouched. Before getting dressed, he shuffled into the kitchen and started brewing coffee. After a quick breakfast sandwich and more coffee, Ted headed to work. He was still fuming and trying to figure out how to make Tony and Kristen pay for their betrayal. At work, he saw everyone there except Tony. He asked Sheila, Tony's secretary, where Tony was, and she replied, "I don't know. No one's heard from him at all." The day dragged on because Ted and Perry were still exhausted from their late-night work, but they were almost done with the project. The rest of the team was checking the code and testing the program before it was installed on the customer's servers. Ted walked around supervising and trying to stay alert, but his mind kept drifting back to what he'd discovered the night before. When quitting time finally arrived, he went back home. Kristen was curled up on the sofa in an old, shabby robe, sipping wine. She had dark circles under her eyes. Looking up at him with a guilty expression, she said, "Where were you last night? You didn't even call to say you wouldn't be home, and you never came back. And where's your sister? I thought she was staying with us for a few days. She got an urgent call and had to leave early. I took her to the airport yesterday afternoon, then stopped for a drink with some friends on the way back. It was a nightmare. One of them got mugged in the parking lot, so I spent the night at the hospital with her. I'm sorry I didn't call, but my phone died. And you couldn't find a phone at the hospital? borrow a charger, or use your sister's. I just didn't think of it. I'm sorry, dear. Sure. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were out cheating. What's for dinner? I haven't figured that out yet. What do you want? I don't know. Something quick. I'm exhausted. I didn't finish working until after 1:30 and didn't get to sleep until nearly 3. I don't really have anything quick to cook. How about I order a pizza? That's fine. I'm gonna clean up. While Ted was showering, he kept thinking about how to get revenge and fix the mess Kristen had made of their marriage. While washing, he came up with an idea that seemed like a good way to uncover Kristen's cheating. Tony had only basic computer skills. Though he was the business manager, he had only a minor in programming and often acted like an expert, causing problems for his staff. Ted knew Tony's attempts at programming were laughable. He decided to create a web page with the pictures he took of Tony and Kristen and email himself the link so he could discover their affair. To set this up, he needed to hack into Tony's home or office computer and use Tony's details. That afternoon, he went to an internet cafe to start. He first hacked into Tony's home computer. Before setting up the page, he scanned the hard drives to see what he could find. Jackpot! He discovered photos of Tony with several other women, including 2 who were married to men Ted worked with. Ted quickly got to work setting up the website after transferring the photo folder to his computer. He named the site Tease Toots and linked it from various porn sites and some less risque ones. It took him a few days to finish the programming and launch the site. He had to do everything through Tony's home computer to make it look like Tony was behind it. There were days when Ted couldn't work on the site, either due to personal issues or because Tony had shut down his computer. Once the site was live, Ted focused on other ways to get revenge. A few days after launching the site, he sent an email with the link to everyone he could find who knew Tony, Kristen, or the other women. He made it seem like that was how he discovered Kristen's infidelity. When Ted confronted Kristen with the information, she gave him all the usual excuses. I'm sorry, it meant nothing. It was just that one time I ran into him while out with my sister and so on. The next morning, Ted went back to work, confronted Tony, and resigned on the spot, leaving Tony with bruises from Ted's punch and Tony's fall. The divorce quickly turned ugly. Kristen first tried to reconcile, but then filed a countersuit. During this time, she sought revenge on Ted for divorcing her by reporting him to the prosecuting attorney for running an online gambling site. The website had started as a hobby for Ted and his friends to play online Texas Hold'em. It quickly expanded, and Ted made it available to anyone worldwide. Each user was given 2 million chips with no real money value, and an extra 1 million chips daily as a bonus. Initially, if players lost all their chips, they had to wait until the next day to play again. After 2 months, Ted received so many requests for more chips on his gaming website that he set up a system allowing users to buy additional chips to keep playing. The site wasn't a traditional gambling platform since players only won more chips, not money, but it became highly profitable. A year into running the site, Ted's marriage fell apart after discovering Tony's affair with Kristen. Although he considered quitting his job to focus solely on the website, he wanted to complete the project he and Perry were working on first. Over the past year, Ted had added new card games and slot machines to the site, earning substantial income from players buying chips. All the money went into a Cayman Islands bank account under a corporation, with Ted only taking a small salary. No one, including Kristen, knew he was the sole owner. During the divorce process, Kristen reported Ted to the police for running an online casino. However, since players only won chips, and Ted appeared to be just an employee, the police found no grounds for prosecution. The divorce was finalized after 7 months, with Ted required to provide minimal support to Kristen, which she took as a lump sum. Finally free, Ted decided to leave town. He packed his belongings into his truck and a trailer, setting off without a clear destination. His first stop was a scenic river, where he used to go fishing with his grandfather and father. He set up camp on a gravel bar, enjoying 2 days of fishing, swimming, and relaxing before running out of supplies. He then drove to a small town nearby, where he planned to restock. Driving through the town made Ted a bit nostalgic. It used to seem much bigger and busier when he was a kid. Some of the grand old houses were empty, and many of the smaller ones were falling apart. There were several for sale signs on the empty houses, and he wondered how long they had been on the market. Some yards looked like they hadn't been mowed in years. One of the once grandest houses was now completely hidden behind overgrown trees and brush. All you could catch was the occasional glimpse of metal from the roof through the treetops. That house had belonged to a doctor who worked at the local hospital, which had since closed down. The hospital used to have 40 beds and was often full. Now it was just another empty building on the main street. It was really sad. Ted was surprised to see that the small, privately owned phone company was still in business. It had old equipment back when his grandfather had a cabin nearby. Before getting groceries, Ted decided to have a meal at the cafe. To his surprise, he found that the phone company had upgraded and now offered internet and cable TV services. After enjoying a delicious burger, Ted returned to his truck and pulled out his computer. He sat up at a quiet table and started working on his website, handling maintenance tasks he couldn't complete while using his phone as a hotspot by the river. Throughout the afternoon, he drew a few curious glances, but no one disturbed him except the waitress who checked if he needed anything. He managed to catch up on all his work. When he shut his laptop, the cafe owner approached and said, "We don't usually see much of that here. I've been considering canceling our internet subscription since only a few kids use it. I haven't seen you around before. If you don't mind me asking, what were you doing on your computer for so long? You were typing a lot more than just browsing. Are you new in town? No problem, I don't mind sharing. I'm camping by the river to take a break after a rough divorce. My grandfather and I used to fish and camp here when I was a kid, and I thought it would help me unwind. As for what I was doing, I run a website and needed to do some maintenance that was difficult with just my phone as a hotspot. I hope that was okay. That's perfectly fine. That's actually why we installed the internet service. It's partly for us and the staff, but I hoped it might attract some customers too. The phone company gave me a basic video package for free to promote their service, so I took it. So, how long are you planning to stay here? I'm not sure. I'll stay until I feel like moving on. I have all my belongings in my truck and trailer. After the divorce, I left my old home and planned to keep driving until I found a place I liked. This is my first stop, and I'm not tired of it yet. Sounds like you're living the free life. That must be nice. It is, but I've always wanted to find a place I love, settle down, find a good partner, and start a family. I haven't had much luck with that so far, so I'm on the move again. Well, good luck with everything. I need to get back to the kitchen. Just let me know if you need anything else." Ted watched the woman head back to the kitchen. Just before she went in, he called out, "Hey, could you also bring me a salad, another burger, and some fries? And what time does the grocery store close? Of course, I'll bring those right over, but you might want to go to the store before you eat. They close at 6, and it's already 530. You probably won't finish your meal before they shut. If you'd like, I can wait a few minutes to start cooking and you can grab your groceries first." Ted smiled and said, "Thanks, that sounds good. I'll be right back," as he got up and headed for the door. He walked a block down the street and entered the small grocery store. He quickly went through the aisles, picking up items like canned soup, bread, chips, and a few cans of vegetables. Then he moved to the coolers and grabbed lettuce, cheese, lunch meat, and a couple of small steaks. The prices were higher than in big cities, but considering the cost of driving to a larger town, they were reasonable. He paid for his groceries and returned to his truck, where he stored the cold items in his cooler. The truck had an inverter to keep things cool without ice, and his small camping generator on the trailer kept the batteries charged for light, as well as to power his computer and phone while camping by the river. Back at the cafe, Ted walked in and smiled when he saw the woman bringing a salad to his table. She set down the salad, dressing, and some crackers, saying, "Here you go. I started your burger when I saw you loading your groceries into the truck. It shouldn't be much longer now." By the time Ted finished eating, a few more people had come into the small cafe. There were some individuals, a few couples, and even a family. When he paid, the woman thanked him and said, "I hope you come back. It was nice to have someone here in the afternoon. It gets pretty quiet some days. If you're around this Sunday, you should come for lunch. My special is always fried chicken with all the sides, but we still have the regular menu, too. I might just do that. Thanks, Ted said before heading out. A few days later, Ted returned to town and went straight to the cafe. When he walked in, he stopped to check out the bulletin board next to the cash register. It had a list of properties for sale and a notice on county letterhead about a property auction for unpaid taxes. The auction was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Constance, the cafe owner, noticed him looking at the board and smiled as she greeted him. Good to see you back, Ted. How have you been? Good, Constance. I needed some groceries and thought I'd stop by for another one of your great burgers. Great. Do you want it now or are you going to wait a bit? I think I'll wait. He lifted his computer case and added, I was hoping to work for a while first, if that's okay. Sure. Do you need anything right now? Yes. Some unsweetened iced tea would be nice. When Constance brought his tea, she asked, I saw you looking at the bulletin board. Are you searching for something or just browsing? Mostly just browsing. I started looking at the auction flyers and then noticed all the properties for sale. I'm surprised at how much property is being sold for unpaid taxes. It looks like there are 3 or 4 places up for grabs. Yeah, there are. It's the same properties listed year after year with just an occasional new one. One of them is old Doc Fisker's place. It's been on the list for 6 years and no one has even made an offer on it. As far as anyone knows, he didn't have any family left when he died and nobody wants to buy the house. That's not too surprising though. There are several properties for sale in town and maybe 1 or 2 sell each year. Where's his house, Constance? You pass it when you come into town. Actually, you can almost see it from here. Look at the trees on the hillside by the creek. Sometimes you can catch a glimpse of the roof if the sun hits it just right. Yeah, I see it. It looks like a pretty big house. I'm surprised nobody wants it. It used to be not only the biggest house in town, but also the fanciest. I'm not sure about its condition now. I wouldn't be shocked if it's in pretty rough shape. Kids probably broke in and messed it up. A few other vacant houses have even burned down because kids got inside, smoked their stuff and set things on fire. Ted didn't know why, but he found himself fascinated by the big house hidden behind all the overgrown yard. He felt more relaxed and unexpectedly happier in this small town than he had been in months or even years. Occasionally, while working, he would find himself daydreaming about the old house and the upcoming tax sale. Eventually, Ted managed to focus on his work. Around 1 in the afternoon, he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. Constance spotted him and called from the kitchen. Ready for lunch now, Ted? Yeah, thanks, Constance. I think I'll have another salad and burger, but could I get onion rings with the burger today? Sure thing, I'll bring it right out, she replied. While waiting for his meal, Ted chatted with a couple of farmers who were still around after lunch. One of them asked, I've seen you around for a couple of weeks now. Did you move here or something? No, not really. I left my cheating wife, quit my job when I found out she was with my boss, packed up everything I had in a trailer, and just left. My grandfather used to bring me here to fish during the summer, so I decided to camp out on the same gravel bar we used to use and try to relax. I come into town every so often to get groceries and grab one of Constance's burgers. I use her internet to do work that I can't handle with just my phone's hotspot. I thought you said you quit your job. What kind of work can you do from the cafe? I used to run an online gaming site as a side job and I still manage it. I handle the site maintenance here and keep it updated, so I'm still making a bit of money. I don't really get all that tech stuff. I guess you're one of those techie types I hear about. By the way, are you the guy living in that old trailer by the river? Yeah, that's probably me. I haven't caused any trouble, have I? Nope. Joe's used to people parking and fishing on that gravel bar. Everybody's been doing it for years. As long as you don't mess up anything or let his cows out, he doesn't mind. After that, the 2 farmers paid their bill and left. Seeing Constance finishing up with them, Ted decided it was time for him to go too. He settled his bill, went to the store for groceries, and loaded them into his truck. As he was leaving town, he found himself stopping when he drove past the old doctor's house. Ted wanted to take a look at the old place. It was a challenge to push through the overgrown brush, but he managed to make his way to the house. It looked like what they call a 1.5-story house here. That means it had a full ground floor and an attic that was finished. He couldn't see how many rooms were in the attic, but he was sure there were some. As you'd expect, some of the boards on the walls, porches, and windows were rotting. The old house really needed a new coat of paint. The windows were all old, wooden, single-pane glass. But surprisingly, none of them were broken. The roof was still mostly shiny, made of galvanized metal. Ted felt a bit uneasy, but he found a window that wasn't locked and climbed into the house. He spent almost an hour exploring and checking things out. From what he could see, the house's frame was still in good shape and the layout of the rooms was better than many old houses. There were also 2 outbuildings, a detached 2-car garage and a small barn, on what seemed to be a 4 or 5-acre lot. After he finished looking around, he made his way out of the overgrown yard, got back in his truck, and returned to his trailer by the river. Over the next 3 days, he couldn't stop thinking about the old house and how much he liked the small town. On Monday morning, he drove back into town and visited the house again. He retraced his steps and looked at the buildings and grounds once more. Something about the house kept drawing him in, and he ended up sitting on the old porch steps, staring at the overgrown front yard. Around noon, Ted went back to his truck and drove the short distance to the cafe for lunch. While Constance was taking his order, she smiled and said, "So, what do you think of Doc's old house?" "What do you mean?" "Come on, Ted. I can see the house from here, and I saw you checking it out last week and again this morning before you came in. Half the town knows you've been looking at it, so what do you think?" "I'm not sure. There's something about the place that draws me in, but it looks like it would need a lot of work to be livable again. Just cleaning up the yard would be a huge task, and the house itself needs a lot of updates. There are a lot of rotting boards to replace, and I won't know the condition of the framing until I can remove some of the siding or wallboards inside. From what I can see, it will probably need to be completely rewired and replumbed. I just don't know. Yeah, that's probably why no one else has put in a bid. Plus, no one wants to live way out here in the middle of nowhere anymore. So, would you like another burger or something else today?" "I'll have the burger and onion rings again, please, Constance." While waiting for his lunch, Ted kept glancing at the old house. He didn't even check his website while he waited. Throughout his meal, he kept looking at the house, then had to force himself to log onto his computer and finish the little bit of work he had left. Once he finished, instead of going to the grocery store, he went back to his campsite. He spent most of the day working on his computer, checking his finances, updating his records, and making changes to the website's design. With over 50,000 players on his site, each spending about $5 a week on chips, he was on track to make around $13 million a year. Depending on the year and equipment costs, his profit was usually 15 to 20% of that amount. Ted had a restless night and woke up just after dawn. As he drank his coffee and watched the sun rise, he thought about his life and the day ahead. Without really thinking about it, he filled his large thermos with coffee, got into his truck, and drove to town. This time, he skipped the turnoff to the small town and continued down the highway to Knott City, the county seat. He found a place to park and walked towards the courthouse just after 9:30 a.m. After checking the location for the upcoming tax and foreclosure auction, he waited. Right on time, the sheriff and 2 men in suits arrived with a tall, lean man wearing worn Levi's and a blue chambray western shirt. His outfit was completed with cowboy boots and a white Stetson hat. The group of men looked out at the small crowd of people who had gathered before the sheriff began speaking. "Good morning, everyone. We're about to start auctioning some foreclosed properties and a few for unpaid taxes. If you're here for that, please come closer and we'll begin." A few people moved away while the rest moved closer to the men. The auctioneer stepped up with his microphone and grabbed a paper from one of the men in suits. He read from the paper, then gave details about the property, including its address, payment terms, and the starting bid. The foreclosed properties were sold first, and most of the bidders left, leaving just Ted and 2 others. They gave the rules for the tax sales before starting the second part of the auction. 2 farms were sold, and then Ted watched as the other 2 bidders decided to leave. The remaining men looked at Ted, and one asked, "Are you here for the auction, sir?" "Yes. All the land has been sold. We only have a few old abandoned houses left. Are you interested in any of those?" "Yes. I might be a bit crazy, but I'm interested in an old house in Thomasville. One of the men flipped through the remaining papers and asked, "Which one are you interested in?" "We have 3 properties in Thomasville." Ted gave them the address, and the man found the paperwork for Doc's house. After looking it over, he said, "The taxes on that place total $1,575, with 9 years of back taxes and this year's taxes due before December 31st. The minimum bid is the total tax amount." Without hesitation, Ted said, "I bid $1,575. The men glanced around, and the auctioneer did his usual speech before bringing down his gavel and saying, "Sold for $1,575. Ted spent the rest of the day in town, taking care of the property purchase and handling paperwork like deeds, recording the deed, and making the new address his permanent residence so he could update his mailing address and legal residency. He also registered to vote and stopped by the power company to set up electric service. By the time he finished and headed back to Knot City, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. He parked near the cafe and walked inside. As soon as he sat down, Constance came over and asked, "What can I get you tonight?" "Ted, I think I'll have one of your chicken fried steaks with potatoes and gravy and some green beans, please." "You got it. Where have you been all day?" "I didn't expect to see you for a couple more days since you were here yesterday. Spent the day in town and didn't feel like cooking when I got back to camp." Ted finished his meal as soon as Constance brought it, paid his bill, and went back to his campsite. He parked, undressed, and jumped into the cool water for a refreshing swim. After swimming, he packed up most of his gear, which had been left out, though most of it was secure because he'd been gone all day, and relaxed as he watched the sunset. The next morning, after a quick breakfast and coffee, Ted finished packing his gear, hooked his trailer to his truck, and drove to his new house. Within the first hour, several people stopped by to chat with him, watching as he cleared the brush and overgrowth from what was left of the driveway. It took him all day to clear the driveway and make enough room to park his truck and trailer. Once he got the trailer where he wanted it, he unhitched it and grabbed his small bag. He walked to the creek on the edge of his property, found a deep spot, and took a bath before returning to his trailer to change into dry clothes. After getting dressed, Ted walked almost 2 blocks to the cafe. By then, several tables were occupied with customers eating or waiting for their meals. Ted took his usual spot near the front window and smiled when Constance came over with a glass of water. She set the water in front of him, smiled, and said, "You're definitely the talk of the town now. I can't believe you bought that old house. Isn't it in pretty rough shape?" "I've seen worse, but I think the house has good structure. It'll cost a lot to fix it up, but once it's done, it should be a nice place. I could use some help, though. Do you know anyone who might be willing to help me clean it out and tidy up the yard? I might know someone. Have you checked the bulletin board? Sometimes there are ads for help there. I see you moved your trailer into the yard. Are you going to be working here now?" "Yeah, I'll be around for quite a while, either at the house or here. I plan to do as much of the work as I can by myself." Ted spent nearly 2 hours finishing his meal and leaving the cafe. Every man in the place, and a few women too, stopped by his table to chat about the old house. He even got a few tips on possible helpers. Ted wasn't in a rush to get the housework done, so he didn't hurry to hire anyone. Although money wasn't a major issue, it was still something he had to think about. His income was in the Caymans, and he paid himself a small salary through his company to avoid U.S. taxes on the larger sums left offshore. If he used business money for the house, he'd have to pay taxes on the extra amounts. One morning, while relaxing under his favorite tree with a beer, 2 young women walked into his yard and greeted him cheerfully. Ted was nearly speechless when he saw them. They were both tall for women, around 5 feet 8 inches, and quite attractive. He'd seen them around town before. The blonde worked at the cafe occasionally, and he had seen the Hispanic girl chatting and laughing with her there, but he didn't know their names. Both women had their hair in ponytails and were wearing short, tight cutoffs that showed off their figures. Their tops were tight, and their parts were visible through the fabric, suggesting they weren't wearing bras. The 2 women seemed full of energy. The blonde smiled and said, "Hi, Ted. We've seen you working and heard you were looking to hire help, but we haven't seen anyone around. We both work part-time at the cafe for Mom, but don't make much. Tina and I were wondering if you'd hire us to help out. So you're Constance's daughters? I've seen you both around but didn't know who you were. The blonde giggled and said, Yep, I'm Jan, short for Janice, and this is Tina. We're twins and do everything together. Ted looked at the two girls and asked, You're twins? Jen chuckled and said, Well, not exactly. We have different parents, but we're sort of twins. We were both born on the same day, just 20 minutes apart in the same hospital, so we call ourselves twins. We've been best friends forever. I've thought about hiring some help, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. There are definitely things that would be easier with some extra hands, but I'm on a tight budget and have been putting it off. I'm not in a big rush to finish, so I'm just taking my time. I only want to move in before it gets cold this fall. The girls exchanged glances. Then Tina said, Anything we can do would really help. We're both going to college this fall and need to make as much money as we can. We don't know much about construction, but we can learn and help out if you show us what to do. Well, I could use a hand. I remember being a broke college student. What year are you in and what are you studying? Jan replied, We're starting our second year. I want to be a grade school teacher, and Tina is studying something related to computers. After chatting for a few more minutes, Jen said, We have to head out. We promised Mom we'd help her today. See you later. Ted watched as the two girls walked down the street and entered the cafe. He admired them as they went and felt his attraction growing. He thought to himself, Damn, what I wouldn't give to be with them. Once they were out of sight, he went back to work. He was replacing old windows in the house with triple-pane PVC ones. Each window opening had to be resized to fit standard-sized windows, which was cheaper but took a lot of time. Just before noon, Ted stopped working and walked to the cafe for lunch. When he went inside and sat at his usual table, Jan and Tina both cheerfully greeted him. Constance, who had started to come to his table, smiled and went back to the kitchen when she saw the girls approach. Hi, Ted, Tina said brightly. What can we get for you today? I'd like the chicken enchilada platter and an iced tea, please. Jan grinned and said, I'll get that for you right away. You're going to love it. Tina and her mom made it, and their cooking is the best. After finishing his meal, Ted walked over to the register to pay. Constance greeted him with a smile and said, I've seen those two girls come in before, but today they really made a beeline for you. Usually, I have to tell them to wait tables if I'm busy in the kitchen with Tina's mom. I've seen them around but only just talked to them today. They came asking me for a job and said you'd sent them. What? Are you serious? No, I didn't suggest they ask you for work. I just mentioned you were thinking about hiring someone part-time to help with the heavy lifting. I can't believe they want to help with your renovation. They're not lazy, but they're picky about the work they do. They help out here now and then, but always complain. I'm shocked they want to do the tough stuff you need. So you wouldn't recommend them? Not exactly. If you hire them, they'll try their best and give you a fair day's work for their pay. I'm just surprised they're willing to do the hard work and asked you about it. Oh, I didn't say I was hiring them yet. I've been doing as much as I can myself to save money, but I'll need help soon. Do you think they're strong enough for the heavy work? Do they know anything about construction? Jan doesn't, but Tina's dad is a contractor, and she used to go with him to job sites when she was younger. I'm sure she knows quite a bit. So how was your meal? I was surprised you didn't go with your usual hamburger today. Ted chuckled and said, It was really good. I still love your burgers, but I wanted to try something different. I really enjoy good Tex-Mex. It would have been perfect with some chips and salsa. We've thought about adding that, but it would cost more and we couldn't serve it the way they do in Mexican restaurants. I get it, but to me, a Mexican meal isn't complete without chips and salsa. You should also consider adding a good pizza to the menu. It's a hassle to drive all the way to the county seat for pizza. Constance laughed and said, You're asking for a lot. We can't fit a huge menu in this small place. Maybe you'd like to come work here and cover the costs of all that extra inventory? Ted chuckled and said, No, not really. I was just making a suggestion. Constance smiled and Ted got up to head back to his work. She followed him to the register, took his payment, and then they both went their separate ways. The next morning, Ted had just begun working when Jan and Tina arrived, dressed like they were the day before. Hey, Ted, Tina said, What are we doing today? Ted frowned and replied, I was planning to finish fixing the siding so I can paint it in the next day or two. What are you two up to today? Jan looked a bit uneasy and said, We're up for anything. We'll try whatever you need. Ted wasn't sure how to respond. It seemed like the girls thought he had already hired them or was about to. Unsure what to say or do, Ted hesitated. The girls looked worried and started to turn away when he finally said, Well, if you really want to help, I could use it, but you're not dressed for anything too messy or tough. Ted glanced around at the work that needed to be done and had an idea. He was replacing damaged siding and boards on the back of the house, but the rest of the exterior was ready for painting. He'd already scraped off the old paint and smoothed the edges. Here's the deal, he said. I'm still working on the back, but if you want to start painting the exterior, you can. The paint's on the front porch, and I still have the scaffolding set up on the side so you can start from the top. The girls grinned and almost bounced with excitement. Ted tried not to stare as he noticed their tight tops barely containing their bouncing tops. Jan said, Come on, Tina, let's get to work. They eagerly moved toward the front of the house to start their new task. Ted never knew how long the girls would work each day or if just one would show up. When they weren't working on the house, he often saw them at the cafe during his lunch breaks. Ted didn't always work on the house, as he also had to handle tasks for his website and occasionally did some small programming jobs. He worked on those tasks at the cafe since he didn't have internet at the house yet. By the end of the first week of working with the girls, they had finished painting one side and the front of the house. They applied 2 coats and the house looked fantastic. They also became close friends with Ted, and he suspected they were playfully flaunting their bodies. They had several moments when he got an accidental glimpse down their tops due to loose blouses, and on a few occasions, they wore mini skirts while climbing ladders to paint. On the Friday of their first full week working, Ted called them to the backyard, where they usually relaxed under his beer-drinking tree. He had kept track of their hours and decided on an hourly rate since they hadn't discussed payment before. When the girls arrived and sat down as invited, he handed them each a stack of cash and said, This is your pay for the past week and a half. We didn't discuss pay, so I checked around and came up with this amount for the type of work you did. I hope it's fair. To Ted's surprise, neither of the women checked or counted the money. They simply stuffed it into the pockets of their tight shorts. They had to stand up to do this, and once the cash was securely in their pockets, they both jumped up, leaned in, and surprised him with kisses that were much more passionate than a simple thank you. Tina was on one side, leaning her thighs and pelvis against his arm and shoulder. Jan was on the other side, with her hand on his shoulder and her thigh rubbing his arm. Tina said, Thanks, Ted. I'm sure the pay is fine, but you didn't have to give us anything. We just wanted to help you. It's pretty dull here, since most of our friends have left and school's out. Plus, she said, pressing her pelvis closer, we enjoy being with you. Can we come over tomorrow and just hang out instead of working? Sure, I guess. I was planning to work on the house, but you don't have to come. No, I mean, could you not work and just let us hang out and maybe have a little party? Ted thought briefly and answered, Sure, I suppose so. I don't have any deadlines. We've almost finished the outside and it'll be done before it gets cold. That was my main goal for the summer. I want to get a couple of rooms inside done so I can move in before it gets chilly. I'm sure I can manage that, so taking a day off will be nice. Both girls smiled and hugged him tighter before sitting back down. They drank a couple of beers with him before heading off to clean up and help Constance with the Friday night crowd at the cafe. Ted had to adjust himself after they left because of the kisses and the way they rubbed against him. Watching them walk away didn't help either. The next morning, Ted was still outside with his coffee when the 2 girls showed up. They came around the corner of his house carrying a cooler and a sack of groceries. They quickly walked over, set their things down, and gave him a quick kiss. Ted nearly spilled his coffee as they kissed him and asked, Wow, what's this about? Jen gave him a puzzled look and asked, Didn't you like it? We're sorry if we surprised you. Tina seemed a bit down as Ted spoke, so he quickly said, No, it's not that. You just caught me off guard. What guy wouldn't enjoy 2 pretty women giving him a kiss? What did you bring? I thought we were just going to hang out. I feel bad now because I didn't prepare anything special. Don't feel bad. We just brought some drinks and burgers and hot dogs with all the toppings. We know you like Mom's burgers from the cafe, so we thought we'd do a cookout. Is that okay with you? Sure, no problem. So what's the plan for today since it's your party? Not much, Jan said. Just hanging out, drinking, swimming, and grilling burgers and hot dogs. She grabbed his hand and pulled him up. Come on, let's go swimming. It's too hot to just sit and drink coffee. Ted let them pull him up and followed the laughing girls down the path to the deep swimming hole at the back of his property. It was only about 150 feet away, and he could already hear people splashing and chatting loudly in the water. He stopped for a moment and said, "Hold on. Let me at least grab my swim trunks." "Oh, come on," Tina said. "Those old shorts are fine. Besides, we don't want to wait. We're hot." "Yeah, I can see that," Ted said under his breath. Jan grinned and asked, "What did you say? You think we're hot?" Yeah. But I'm sorry if you heard that. I shouldn't have said it. Don't be silly. It's good to know you think we're hot. All women want to know their men think they're attractive. You meant it, didn't you?" Tina nudged Jan and whispered, "Be quiet." Ted was surprised by their conversation, but decided he must have misunderstood and let them lead him toward the stream. Soon, they were all swimming and splashing with the other people in the water, though it seemed Jan and Tina spent most of their time chatting and playing with Ted. After a few minutes, Jan disappeared and came back with 3 beers and some pool noodles. She handed a beer and a noodle to Ted and Tina, then sat on her noodle and started sipping her beer while relaxing and chatting with everyone. Ted soon joined in the conversation and got to know the others in the water. To his surprise, he was having a great time. Jan and Tina made several trips back to the yard for more beer and sandwiches by noon. As the sun began to set in the late afternoon, Jan said, "Come on, it's time for dinner." By then, all 3 were feeling the effects of the beer and everything seemed hilarious. Most of their friends had left, and those who stayed were either preparing or eating their evening meals on the bank. On the way back up the path, Ted found himself walking between the 2 women who had their arms around each other with their hips bumping together as they walked. They were all pretty drunk and everything was funny. Jan looked up at Ted and said with a giggle, "You can barely walk straight. How are you going to handle us? Don't forget, you've got to cook the burgers. We need to grill them and then party." After Jan finished speaking, Tina pulled Ted's head down and gave him a big sloppy kiss. While kissing him, she reached out and felt the bulge in his wet shorts, then looked at Jan and said, "I don't know about the burgers, but he's already got 1 hot dog ready for us." Ted tried to push her hand away, spluttering, "Stop it. What are you doing? What would your mother say if she saw you too? You're drunken." His words were cut off when Jan kissed him again. After that kiss, both girls grabbed his hands and pulled him back into the yard, making him sit in his usual chair. Tina handed another beer to Ted while Jan got the gas grill going. Once the grill was lit, the 2 women started unloading food and drinks from the cooler and bags they had brought. They quickly set out the food and paper plates on a small table, then grabbed beers for themselves and joined Ted as they waited for the grill to heat up. When Jan thought the grill was ready, she said, "Ted, I think it's time for you to cook the burgers and hot dogs. We'll get the buns ready." She and Tina giggled as they went to the table to prepare the buns for the meat. Before long, they were all eating burgers, chips, and some delicious barbecue beans Jan had brought from her mom's cafe. After the meal, they cleaned up and headed back to the stream for a late swim. By the time they arrived, everyone else had left, so they had the swimming hole all to themselves. Their swim turned into playful touching, lots of kisses, and some serious flirting. Once they were cooled off, they all went back to Ted's yard. The girls quickly started undressing themselves and Ted before pushing him into his tent and pulling him onto the bed. Ted lay there in the fading light with the 2 beautiful women on either side of him, both rubbing and kissing him. Without really thinking, he asked, "Girls, what's going on here? Why are you doing this?" They both lifted their heads slightly to look him in the eyes. Jan said, "We noticed you watching us at the cafe almost from the first day you came in. You were never rude or obnoxious like most of the guys we've dated. And Mom really likes you. We haven't found anyone else around here or at college that we like enough to date more than once or twice. You're different. We've spent the whole summer with you and you've never treated us badly. We wanted to date you and see if something could develop between us, but you never asked us out, so we decided to make the first move." "Okay, I get that. After how much my wife hurt me, I was really hesitant to start dating again. Also, you're almost 5 years younger than me, so I didn't think you'd be interested, even if I did ask. Well, you were wrong. We're very interested in you. I don't know what to say. I really like both of you and enjoy being with you, but I can't even imagine picking just one. The girls smiled and hugged him. Tina said, "Good. We don't want you to choose. As twins, we do everything together and we don't want you to pick. You're stuck with both of us, Ted." Ted groaned and hugged each of the women gently as they kissed him and played with him. Soon, the women noticed Ted wasn't responding and seemed relaxed. They looked and saw Ted had fallen asleep while they were still touching him. Jan said, "That's a bummer. I can't believe he just fell asleep on us. Are we really that boring?" Tina laughed and said, "Maybe we gave him too much beer. He's been working hard, too." "Yeah, but what do we do now? How about we go to sleep?" Tina smiled, adjusted herself to get comfortable with her head resting on Ted, and soon all three were asleep. They didn't wake up until early the next morning. Ted woke up before the girls and had to get them off his arms so he could rush to the bathroom. His head was pounding. His mouth felt dry. His stomach was unsettled. He was incredibly thirsty. He quickly brewed a pot of coffee and started trying to recover from his hangover. Before Ted finished his first cup of coffee, both women stumbled out of his tent. They didn't say a word to him as they rushed inside to use the bathroom. Soon after, they came back outside, each with a cup of coffee, and sat down, watching Ted while sipping their drinks. After they finished the coffee pot, Ted said, "You two are a handful. I'm heading to the cafe for breakfast. Wanna come along?" They looked at each other before Tina replied, "Sure, but I'm not sure I can eat much." When the three of them walked into the cafe, Constance saw them, laughed and said, "You three look like you've had a rough night. I heard you were partying hard. Hope you've learned your lesson." Ted flopped into his usual chair with a woman on each side and said, "I take offense at that, Constance. Despite what you might think, I'm still as innocent as ever. They tried to corrupt me with their drinks, but they didn't succeed." Jan blushed, smacked Ted on the shoulder and said, "Hey, that's my mom. You don't need to say stuff like that. Besides, you weren't exactly resisting before you fell asleep." Most of the guys in the cafe laughed at that, and Constance said, "You girls didn't." "Oh, never mind. What do you want to eat, Ted?" Ted gave his order, and Constance headed to the kitchen. Jen called out, "Mom, what about us? If you want something, come make it yourself. You're not paying customers." Jan and Tina exchanged looks before they got up and followed Constance into the kitchen. Everyone could hear their voices mixed with the usual kitchen sounds. While the meals were being prepared, Ted got some good-natured teasing from his friends and a few warnings about the girls. Soon, Jan and Tina came out of the kitchen with plates of food, carefully set them on the table, and took their seats to start eating. There was hardly any conversation as the three of them tried to recover from their wild night. Ted finished his meal before the women and waited for them to finish. Once they were done, he stood up and said, "I need to head home and recover. See you two later," before heading to the cash register. Constance took Ted's money at the register, and as soon as he stepped outside, Jan and Tina joined him, each wrapping an arm around his waist. Ted glanced at them but didn't say anything. He put an arm around each of them as they slowly walked back to his house. When they got to his backyard, Ted fell onto his bed and quickly fell asleep, hardly noticing when the two women settled in next to him once again. They all slept in until almost noon, then took turns using the bathroom. Afterward, they relaxed with some iced tea. Ted asked, "Were you girls serious yesterday? Or were you just messing with me about some things you said?" Jan responded, "What things? I don't remember much of our conversation. I remember laughing a lot and messing around, but not much else. You both mentioned that you wanted to sleep with me." "Oh, that? Yeah, but you knew that, didn't you?" "Not really. I figured you were teasing and I was just trying to decide which one of you I might ask out. But that's all." "Ted, I think we told you it doesn't work like that. We both like you a lot and we share everything. We haven't found anyone else we care about and we're close like sisters. We both want you and we don't want to hurt each other, so we agreed to share. Is that a problem?" "Well, yes, no, I don't know. I like you both a lot, "But what about your parents and everyone in town?" Tina replied, "What about them? It's none of their business. We know we can't both marry you, but if things work out, there's no rule against us both living with you." The girls took on more responsibilities with the renovations, choosing paint, decor, and finishing touches. They first completed the kitchen, following all the girls' preferences. Then they converted the old sitting room and butler's pantry into a master suite with a large bath, followed by the formal living room, dining room, and a small office, which they turned into a future nursery. They finished the downstairs just in time for their first Thanksgiving meal as a family. During the winter, they began renovating the upstairs, creating 2 large bedrooms, a game room, and a bathroom. By Thanksgiving, Ted's house was filled with their families, who were initially surprised but soon accepted the unconventional lifestyle of Ted living with 2 women. Jan and Tina graduated from college, with Jan becoming a teacher and Tina joining Ted in developing games and apps. Their happiness and success continued, and the money kept coming in.